Welcome back to Board Game Wednesdays. Today we're going over the 8th and 9th rounds of our playthrough of Axis and Allies 1942 2nd Edition. And we are rapidly approaching the end of the game. Do the Axis have it in them for one final push to put them back in the fray? Or have the Allies got this in the bag? Only one way to find out. Fall, 1944. The game enters its 8th round of play. The Western Allies hold France with a force too strong for the Germans to risk attacking, while the Soviets and Japanese face off in eastern Russia. Kicking off this round, the Soviets continued their buildup and positioning for their offensives into Germany and a counterattack against Japan. All their armor and anti-air guns were moved to Russia. They would take no chances with a Japanese assault on Moscow. Placing their units, not every build ended up in Russia. Units placed in Karelia and the Caucasus would eventually occupy the Axis territories along Germany's eastern front. Ending their turn, the Soviets collected 25 IPCs, 26 with the one saved earlier. The German players knew that assaulting France would be a very foolish decision. While they technically had the advantage, the forces needed to safely win would leave Germany and Italy defenseless. And even with all available forces attacking, the battle was still only slightly better than a toss-up. In their shortest turn all game, Germany would build and deploy, collecting 24 IPCs. The hope for an Axis victory, even with the Japanese outside Moscow, was slim. Pride was what drove the German players now. If the Allies wanted Berlin, they would have to take it at a heavy, heavy price. With France secured, the British could steadily reinforce the territory, while also diverting appropriate resources to India. That would materialize as 3 tanks this turn. Despite the IJN's defeat in the South Pacific, the British Empire was still weary about their chances against the Japanese assault, especially with how quickly they could reinforce Burma once their transport train was up and running. With this threat in mind, the British forces in the Soviet Union were retreated to Persia, on their way to aid in the defense of India. All Allied players were confident in the Soviets' ability to hold out on their own. On the Western Front, the British made one combat move, occupying northwestern Europe with 2 infantry. Everything else in the United Kingdom was moved to France. The British deployed their build and collected 40 IPCs, finally rivaling the economy of the Japanese. The push on Moscow was falling apart. The Soviets could build up faster than Japan could reinforce, and with the Germans content to hold their positions, that was unlikely to change anytime soon. They considered sending all of their forces into Kazakh SSR, but the battle calculator revealed a Soviet counterattack had a 100% success rate. The only front where Japan really had a chance was India. Once their transport train resumed, the Japanese players believed that they could quickly outpace British defenses. Their earlier plan for a 2-pronged push into the Soviet Union would remain in place. In their build, the Japanese included a destroyer and a fighter. With the US Navy's withdrawal last round, the IJN believed they still had time to build back up, despite their humiliating defeat. Only one attack move would occur when a single Japanese tank blitzed in and out of Vologda. Afterwards, the Japanese reinforced, moving their units up in China and bringing 4 full transports of units to Burma, protected by the entire Japanese fleet. Japan deployed its build, collecting 41 IPCs, still fairly high despite everything. The much-anticipated naval engagement would finally occur. The US Navy would attack the German Mediterranean fleet. While much less of a spectacle now than it would have been a few rounds earlier, the elimination of the Kriegsmarine would pave the way for the invasion of Italy and then Germany itself. Even with this impending action in Europe, more IPCs would be sent west than east. The US was confident in the Allies' ability to take on what was left of the Germans. Japan would be dealt with soon, so American production would steadily move that way. The battle commenced. All in-range combat vessels assaulted Sea Zone 15. The battle was over in one round, costing 2 American destroyers and the entirety of the German fleet. The Kriegsmarine was no more. In preparation for the invasion of Italy, the forces in Morocco were transported to France. All remaining American troops in Africa were brought to the coast. Next round, 5 American transports would use them in an amphibious assault on Italy. The Atlantic transport train continued as well, bringing even more forces in for the attack. Over in the Pacific, the 2 American task forces linked up around Hawaii, ready for the IJN's next move. The US deployed its build, collecting 42 IPCs, 43 with one saved earlier. They now topped their original starting amount. The Soviet player had an epiphany of sorts at the beginning of their 9th turn. They had held off on attacking the Japanese in fear of a failed assault leaving Moscow vulnerable, and a desire to keep their tanks in range of Karelia should the Germans launch an attack. With the Allies amassing in Western Europe, however, plus the Soviet build arriving at the end of their turn, Karelia was probably safe from any German offensives. And a quick look at a battle calculator revealed a 100% success rate attacking Novosibirsk. The Allies drew up a new plan for Asia. The Soviets would annihilate the Japanese troops on their border, then advance towards Manchuria. This would likely pull Japanese attentions away from India, where British forces would either give chase to or build up and destroy the Japanese Southern Army. All the while, the US would move quickly to destroy the IJN, cutting off the mainland from reinforcing its territories, making the capture of Manila and Shanghai a breeze. If all went according to plan, Germany should have fallen by then, and 12 victory cities would be in Allied hands, ending the game. The massive Soviet offensive got underway. In 2 rolls, the Japanese army that had been threatening Moscow for nearly half the game was wiped away, costing the Soviets merely 5 infantry and 2 artillery. With that, any hopes for an Axis victory had been dashed. The Soviets deployed their build and collected 26 IPCs. The march on Manchuria had begun. The Battle of Novosibirsk reinforced what the Germans already expected. It was over. All that was left was to hold on to their capital, make the Allies fight and fight hard for it. Maybe if they amassed enough forces, the Allied players would get bored and call a draw. With this in mind, the Germans retreated everything from Italy into Germany. No point in losing them to the Americans. The Germans deployed their build, collecting 22 IPCs. How long would Berlin hold out? The Soviet offensives had emboldened the UK. Counting up each of their units capable of reaching Burma, they matched the Japanese defenders in strength. A battle now would be a toss-up. However, if their southern army was destroyed, the IJA would be neutered, and all of mainland Asia could be taken with ease. The British would take the chance. Not forgetting about their fight against Germany, their build would include a transport, bringing their Atlantic count up to 4. This way, all 8 of their builds for the UK could be deployed to Europe each turn. The battle in Burma was brutal. In the first roll, the British landed 10 hits to the Japanese 8, each side taking them on their weakest units. Pressing the attack, both the British and Japanese landed 5 hits. Despite the heavy losses, the British were undeterred. All the Japanese infantry had been wiped out, and with each roll, the disparity in dice strength grew wider and wider. On the third roll, the British landed another 5, while the Japanese only landed 2. Only the British tanks remained, but they pressed on. Roll 4 only saw 2 and 3 hits, leaving 5 British tanks and 3 Japanese tanks. In the 5th and final roll, the British scored exactly 3 hits to the Japanese mere 1. The British Empire now held Burma with 4 tanks. Despite the high cost, the battle was a resounding success. In 2 turns, the IJA had practically become a non-factor, and the threat posed by Japan was minimal. It was no longer a question of whether, but a when the Allies would win. Reinforcing their positions and deploying their build, the UK collected 41 IPCs. Like the Germans, the Japanese players now realized that it was over. Their only play now was to inflict as much hurt on the Allies as possible, hopefully wearing them out to call a truce. The Japanese would build forces for Manchuria, Japan, and for their navy, and hold out as long as they could. Across their entire front, the Japanese retreated. Their new defensive orb would cover Tokyo, Shanghai, Manchuria, and the 3 sea zones that surrounded them. Pulling all their forces into this zone, the Japanese players promised the Allies that entering this area would be entering into a kill box. The Japanese deployed their build, collecting 37 IPCs, ready for the final stand. While the battles of Novosibirsk and Burma had the Allied teams celebrating, the game wasn't over yet. The Americans had yet to have a decisive offensive of their own. They hoped to have it in Germany or the newfound kill box around Japan. With a massive army already in Europe, all of the American build went west. The US converged on Italy, filling it with 18 infantry, 7 artillery, and 3 tanks. The only nearby unit that didn't participate in the invasion was a lone artillery in Egypt, which crossed the Suez Canal and reoccupied the Transjordan. In the Pacific, the fleet around Hawaii grabbed the forces on land and sailed down to New Guinea. Over the next few turns, they would occupy the Japanese-controlled islands as a new American armada was built up. With Italy firmly in American hands, the transports in the Atlantic headed west, destined to aid the invasion of Japan. From here on out, American reinforcements in Europe would come only from the Italian factory. The US deployed its build and collected 45 IPCs, the strongest their economy had been all game. And with that, rounds 8 and 9 have come to an end. With the IJA destroyed, the question of an Allied victory sounds more like a win instead of a whether. But the game is not over. Do the Allied players have it in them to slog out a proper win? Remember, this game was played over the course of an afternoon. Find out next Board Game Wednesday, right here on EMFX Studios. What would you have done in the player's shoes? Let us know down in the comments. A special thank you to Split Window Studios for providing us this space, and be sure to subscribe to EMFX Studios for more.